Well, John, I am standing here outside the White House. You can see a crowd of several hundred protesters is gathered here behind me. They're holding banners. They are currently, as we stand here, crying out the name of George Floyd. They're kneeling down on one knee in his memory. I think you can see there very clearly in front of them a new long black fence that has been erected unbelievably overnight by the White House, symbolic really of the moment and of the president's speech overnight, which wasn't in any way open and inclusive, reaching out to the people in a way of healing. It was instead a threat, really. He threatened a federal crackdown on cities and states that didn't immediately bring an end to some of the violence that we've seen across America in the past week or so. And of course, those images that we've now all seen, he did exactly that last night on a crowd of peaceful protesters half an hour before the curfew, even as he simultaneously reached out to his base, his supporters, and reassured them that he would defend their right to bear arms, which many saw as exactly that, a call to arms by the president. This was vintage President Trump in an election year. He wants to be seen as strong and tough, the president, as he called himself, of law and order. Joe Biden, the presumptive Democratic nominee today, has said that President Trump is part of the problem, he says, consumed with his blinding ego, he described it. But the images, really, of the protesters fleeing last night, a barrage of rubber bullets and tear gas, aside from the president's words that he wants them to remember, those images may well be the thing that everybody here remembers the most. After 7 days when violence has ripped through the heart of America, the president finally addressed the nation, a moment they hoped for calm and unity.
I am your president of law and order and an ally of all peaceful protesters.
And yet moments before he spoke, a couple of hundred yards from where he stood on the podium, the White House let forth a phalanx of troops, Secret Service and mounted police, who, without warning, unleashed a barrage of stun grenades, tear gas and rubber bullets on the crowd of peaceful protesters. As they fled, in a split-screen moment synonymous with his presidency, this is how the scene played out on national television.
If a city or state refuses to take the actions that are necessary to defend the life and property of their residents, then I will deploy the United States military and quickly solve the problem for them.
With the streets cleared out, the president, smarting from criticisms that he'd hid in his bunker as America burned, strode out, stepping across the debris and framed by angry graffiti for this staged photo op in front of the president's church. It was lost on no one that he was flanked by white people after a speech where he mentioned the death of George Floyd, but said nothing of how he would heal a fractured, angry nation. Later, the Episcopal Bishop of Washington, who presides over the church, said she was given no warning of the president's stunt.
He was using our church as a backdrop and the Bible as a prop in ways that I found to be deeply offensive.
And he was doing so the same day that Terrence Floyd visited the site of his brother's death and called for peace.
Do this peacefully, please. If I'm not over here blowing up stuff, if I'm not over here messing up my community, then what are y'all doing?
But across the country, the rage continued. In New York, looters ransacked the famous Macy's department store, while police officers were injured by gunfire in Missouri and Las Vegas. 2 people were killed in Chicago. There was one moment of calm when the police chief in New York, where officers are being investigated for brutal tactics against protesters, fell to his knee in respect for George Floyd and embraced a young black man. But in Washington, military helicopters circled menacingly overhead as streets near the White House were blocked off one by one and protesters forced back.
People keep getting killed and nobody held accountable. Nobody's held accountable. That's what it is, plain and simple.
Do you feel that you need to hear from your president? Do you think that he's risen to this crisis?
The principle here that you need to be focused on is Black Lives Matter. You need to be more compassionate. If you're supposed to be my president, then do something. I do not feel safe in America.
He's threatening the people. He's threatening the people he's supposed to represent and he's supposed to protect.
Has the president done anything in your view to help this situation?
No.
As evening fell, the Attorney General William Barr, whose Justice Department helped oversee the crackdown, left the White House, as did Mark Esper, the Defense Secretary, who stopped to talk to military personnel.
Are you happy with the results of the crackdown this evening? Was the use of tear gas on the crowd outside the White House wholly necessary this evening? Are you happy with the results of the crackdown this evening?
The lights are on. The president of law and order may feel safer, but does the rest of America?
Well, we're now joined from Arlington, Virginia by Paris Dennard, a conservative commentator who's worked for George W. Bush in the White House and has been named the spokesperson for Black Voices for Trump for the 2020 re-election campaign. And from Washington, D.C., the lawyer Roy Austin, who was Deputy Assistant Attorney General at the U.S. Department of Justice under President Obama. He later worked for the White House. Can we just ask you, first of all, Paris Dennard, what does it say of President Trump that he's become the first president in more than 3 decades to have to consider bringing the army onto the streets of America?
Well, first of all, I want to say that package was the biggest piece of leftist propaganda I've ever seen in my life. I think it's just deplorable that your viewers are seeing that and that total distortion of what's happening. But I will say that President Trump did not want to get to this point of having to ask or bring in the National Guard because Democrat leaders, mayors, and governors did not do what they should have done, which is call in the Guard themselves and get order and prevent the looting, the rioting, the violence, the shootings, the deaths from Antifa, whom the president wants to label a domestic terrorist organization, and other outside agitator groups that are destroying, burning down the Black community, Black small businesses. The president did not want that to happen. That's why he called on the Democrat mayors and governors to act. In America, we have something called federalism. And the governors and the mayors are actually in charge of their own states and cities. And so they have to act to keep the peace. And that is exactly what President Trump was calling on that to happen so that we would not get to a point where Black cities in America will be burned down, businesses would be burned down like they were 99 years ago during the Tulsa riot, where the Black Wall Street was burned away, and that ended generational Black wealth, Black businesses, and the Black community. The president is standing on the side.
I think you've had a pretty good say. I think we'll have to interrupt. There are other people in the discussion, or one other person. So let's move on for a moment, Paris Dennard. I would just point out that our correspondent is actually there and you're not. And that is a rather large difference between the two of you.
And I will actually point out that I am from the Black community. I will actually point out that I know what's going on in my community. I will actually point out that Arlington, Virginia is not technically Washington, D.C., but it is across the bridge. That's happened where I happen to live. So don't insult me and saying just because your reporter happens to be on there has any idea what it means to be Black in America, has any idea what it means to go through what we are going through. This country and these Black communities are suffering because people like the Democrat governors and mayors stood by and sat there in silence like Joe Biden did from the comforts of his basement in Delaware. Don't offend me. This is serious. We know what's going on in our country.
Talking of offence, perhaps we could just move on. Roy Austin. Roy Austin, talking of offence, how offensive is it for the president to have described the people on the streets of New York as lowlife and losers?
You know, the president's rhetoric is unbelievable, and Mr. Dennard is clearly unhinged at this moment because his president is flailing and failing in every way imaginable. From the time he came into office, he has been pouring oil on people, on movements that have been trying to address police misconduct, police misbehavior. Your report that led into this thing was wholly accurate. Look, there are tens of thousands of people who are marching peaceably. There are a few outliers there, and it's unclear who those outliers are. There are mayors and governors, Republican and Democratic, who have called for peace, and yet this president has called for shooting of looters, which makes no sense. He's called for putting dogs on peaceful demonstrators, which makes no sense. And yesterday we all watched as he basically used hundreds of National Guardsmen and officers simply for a photo opportunity, which made absolutely no sense whatsoever and contradicts everything that people are trying to do. We tried to work with police departments. We tried to work with communities. We tried to work with activists. We were moving the ball forward on these things post-Ferguson. And everything we have done is being undone right now. And to call Arlington, Virginia, Washington, D.C. Just shows how unhinged Mr. Bernard is.
Paris Dennard, may I ask you a question? No, I wish to ask you a question, please. You may be a lawyer, but I'm going to ask you a question. And the question I want to ask you is, does the president understand the black community?
The question I like to ask is, does Joe Biden understand the black community? The question I want to know is, did President Obama understand the black community? Because he didn't do anything for us.
Perhaps you'd have the grace to answer my question. And my question is, does the president understand the black community?
Because President Trump enacted criminal justice reform, which disproportionately impacted the black community in a positive way. Because President Trump gave unprecedented support for historically black colleges and universities. That shows his support for the black community. When the president says, I understand, I hear you, the president has people around him that look like me who get what's happening at the White House, at the Department of Justice, at Housing and Urban Development. So yes, he really understands what's going on. That's why he called on the Guard and the governors and the mayors to act, because he did not want to see black businesses burn. So when President Obama saw black businesses go down after the rioting, the looting and the violence in Baltimore after Freddie Gay, and he called them thugs, he was right to do so, because he wasn't talking about the peaceful protest. He was talking about the people who were destroying our community. And that is why I'm passionate. That's why I'm upset. I'm upset because people sit by idly and do nothing while black businesses burn to the ground. This is about change. This is about action. And the president
Roy Austin, I must ask you whether you get any sense that the president does understand the black community, does understand something which strikes us here, because we have a little of it ourselves, inequality on a massive scale in America. That's what this is all about, is it not? And the racial divide in America reflects the inequality.
This president doesn't get anything but himself. And Mr. Bernard is putting on a show for this president, hoping you'll see him ranting and raving about absolutely nothing. The bottom line is this president has done very little. Signing one bill does not show that a president actually cares and understands the struggles of others and what others are going through. That's why the protests have spread across the entire country, because the hurt that is being felt after 3 years of this president is finally kind of exploding. But what I want to note, though, is look at the race of the protesters that we have. We have basically young people of all races, of all colors out there, of all faiths out there, who are recognizing the inequality. And again, that this president's message of constant of hate and otherism is finally reaching a boiling point here. So no, this president doesn't understand. This president has never understood. This president has demeaned protesters. He has demeaned lots of individuals. He's blaming everybody but himself for something that really he owns.
Right.
100%.
Mr. Dennard, let me just ask you a key question. What is the way out of this?
The way out of it is to not spread lies like your guest is doing. The way out of it is to have fair and balanced reporting like your journalist did not do. The way out of this is to come together, to find solutions, to find action. One of the ways to do that is to support the Black-owned businesses, to stop bailing out these Antifa lawless people that are rioters. The peaceful protest is something that Americans hold dear. St. John's stayed open. St. John's Episcopal Church stayed open during the March on Washington after people said, the government said that the black people couldn't peacefully protest. There'd be riots. St. John's stayed open. St. John's was closed because of COVID-19.
Paris Dennard, thank you very much. I'm sorry that we must leave it there, but I'm grateful to you indeed for your contribution. And Roy Austin, thank you very much. I'm sorry it was a little more robust than perhaps we'd all prepared for. Thank you very much indeed.
Yeah, you
Thank
better
you
be
both.
prepared because this is a
Thank
serious
you.
issue.
I appreciate it. Thank you.